The ring was still on her finger when she walked out. I keep coming back to that detail, not to the words that had been said, not to the silence that followed them, not even to the faces of 47 people turning toward me in a restaurant private room decorated with white peonies and string lights I'd spent 3 weeks choosing. I keep coming back to the ring. A cushion-cut diamond in a platinum solitaire setting, selected over 6 months of careful, secret deliberation, purchased on a Tuesday in March from a jeweler on 5th Street, who'd shaken my hand and said she's a lucky woman. The ring was still on her finger when she walked out, and she hadn't looked at me once. My name is Nathan. I'm 34 years old, and I teach architectural history at a mid-sized university in Nashville, Tennessee. I am the kind of man who researches things thoroughly: ring settings, restaurant menus, the precise acoustic properties of a room where I intended to ask the most important question of my adult life. I am methodical and, I have been told, occasionally exhausting in my attention to detail. I plan things. I anticipate variables. I build contingencies. I did not build a contingency for Marcus Webb. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is the only place that makes sense of the end, and because I have spent the 4 months since that night trying to construct a narrative that holds. The way a damaged building needs to be understood structurally before it can be assessed for what, if anything, remains worth saving. Her name was Vivian. She's 32, a landscape architect with a firm downtown, the kind of woman who notices the light in a room the moment she enters it and can tell you, without pretension, exactly why a particular arrangement of trees makes a person feel calm. We had been together for 3 years and 4 months. We had a shared lease, a shared bookshelf that had long since stopped being separable by original owner, and a shared understanding, I believed, of where we were going. I proposed on a Saturday evening in April. We were on the rooftop of our building, which I had spent the afternoon decorating with potted lavender and a table set for 2. A bottle of champagne I'd driven 40 minutes to source from a specific vineyard she'd mentioned once in passing 8 months earlier, and which I'd written down because I write things down. I'd rehearsed the words enough times that they stopped sounding like rehearsal, which I understood was the goal. She said yes before I finished the sentence. She cried. I cried. We drank the champagne and sat on the rooftop until the Nashville skyline went dark around us. And I thought, this is the best constructed evening of my life. 3 weeks later, 47 people gathered at Henley's, a private dining venue on Church Street, for the engagement party her mother had insisted on organizing. Vivian's family was from Atlanta. Her mother, Elaine, a woman of considerable social conviction. Her father, Raymond, quiet and watchful in the way of men who have long since delegated the family's emotional management to someone else. And her younger sister, Cora, 28, who had flown in from Portland and who had embraced me at the door with a warmth that I now understand was complicated. My side of the room. My parents, 2 close colleagues from the university, my oldest friend James and his wife, and a scatter of mutual friends Vivian and I had accumulated over 3 years. The room smelled of white flowers and warm bread. The string lights cast a particular golden light that makes everyone look like the best version of themselves. Elaine had done an extraordinary job, which she knew, and this knowledge animated her entire evening. At 8:15, midway through the main course, a man I didn't recognize stood up from the far end of the table. He was tall, maybe 35, with the kind of jaw that photographs well and the posture of someone accustomed to being looked at. He held his wine glass in the easy manner of a person who has made toasts before and expects them to land. I noticed him because standing up at someone else's engagement party without warning is structurally anomalous. It violates the grammar of the event, and I am, as I've said, attentive to anomaly. He looked at Vivian. She had gone very still, and then he said, I think there's something people in this room deserve to know. Nathan's introduction establishes a man whose primary relationship with the world is through careful construction of evenings, of plans, of contingencies. His identity as an architectural historian is not incidental. He understands human experience through the framework of built things, their structural logic, their capacity to hold or fail under load. The engagement party, in his telling, is a masterwork of deliberate design. The sourced champagne, the lavender, the rehearsed words that no longer sound rehearsed. He has built something he believes is sound. The gap between this expectation and the reality that arrives at 8:15 is therefore not merely emotional but existential for Nathan. It is not just that something goes wrong. It is that something goes wrong inside the structure he most trusted at the moment he most believed it was complete. The ring detail, still on her finger as she walks out, encapsulates this gap perfectly. The symbol of the agreement remains while the agreement itself collapses. Vivian's stillness at the moment Marcus stands is the first signal the audience receives that she has known something Nathan has not. Her body responds before her mind can manage it, a physiological tell of prior knowledge, of a secret that has suddenly materialized in the room. This micro-moment, described briefly but precisely, does more psychological work than any explicit revelation could. It tells us that what follows is not a surprise to everyone, and that the asymmetry of knowledge in this relationship runs deeper than Nathan has understood. The final image, a stranger holding a wine glass, 47 people about to turn, is a structural cliffhanger in the most literal sense, a load-bearing moment where everything depends on what comes next, and where the audience, like Nathan, has no contingency plan. I need to go back 6 months, because the evening at Henley's did not arrive from nowhere, even though it felt that way. Vivian and I had met at a conference, an urban planning symposium at Vanderbilt where I'd been presenting a paper on Beaux-Arts civic architecture, and she had been on a panel about biophilic design principles in public spaces. She'd asked a question during my Q&A that was so precisely targeted at the one argument I hadn't fully resolved that I'd stood at the podium for 3 seconds longer than was comfortable before answering. Afterward, she'd found me at the coffee station and said, "I wasn't trying to be difficult." I'd said, "You were right, though." She'd smiled in a way that rearranged something in me. We were together within the month. What I want to convey about the first 2 years is that they were genuinely good. Not in the retrospective way people sometimes describe relationships they're trying to justify, but in the day-to-day texture of two people who fit in the specific ways that matter. We cooked well together. We traveled without fighting. She read my drafts with the critical attention of someone who was actually interested, and I learned, slowly, to read a landscape the way she did, as an argument made in soil and light and elevation. We were intellectually matched, which I hadn't known to want until I had it. The third year was different. Not dramatically different. I want to be precise about this, because the temptation, in retrospect, is to identify a single rupture, a week, a conversation, a trip where things broke. And there wasn't one. What there was instead was a gradient, a slow cooling that I categorized, for months, as the natural shift from new relationship intensity to settled partnership. I told myself this was maturity. I told myself that the couples who talked about their relationship most were often the ones whose relationships were most precarious, and that our relative quiet was a sign of solidity rather than erosion. The first signal, the first one I can trace with any honesty, came in November, 8 months before the engagement party. Vivian had started working late. Not consistently, not every night, but with a frequency that exceeded what her project load, as she described it, seemed to require. She was leading a public park redesign for the city, a significant commission, genuinely demanding, and I accepted this explanation without examination the way you accept a familiar equation, having verified it once, years ago. What I noticed, without flagging to myself as significant, was that she rarely described the work when she came home. In the first 2 years, she'd come through the door full of the day. The client who'd wanted to remove a stand of mature oaks for a parking expansion, the contractor who'd misread a drainage specification. Now she came home quieter, changed her clothes, asked about my day with the specific attentiveness of someone redirecting a conversation they don't want to be in. I noticed. I archived. In December, she bought a new phone. Her old one had been dying for months. Genuinely, visibly, dramatically dying, the kind of battery situation that required carrying a portable charger everywhere. So a new phone was unremarkable. What was slightly more remarkable was that she set it up herself, in the bedroom, with the door not quite closed, and didn't ask me to help transfer her apps the way she always had, the way she'd asked with every previous phone, because she found the migration process tedious and I found it simple. A small thing, easily explained. In January, she started going to a yoga studio. This, too, was unremarkable on its face. Vivian had practiced yoga intermittently throughout our relationship, the way many people do. Committed for a month, absent for 3, recommitted. But this time she was consistent in a way she hadn't been before, twice a week. Same times, same studio, which she'd chosen, she said, because a colleague had recommended the instructor. The colleague's name, she said, was Rebecca. I met Rebecca at Vivian's firm holiday party in February. A woman of about 40, a senior project manager, pleasant and clearly genuine in her fondness for Vivian. They had the easy shorthand of people who spent real time together. I filed Rebecca under confirmed and stopped thinking about the yoga studio. The thing about red herrings is that they don't announce themselves. They look exactly like explanations. What I did not know in February was that Vivian had attended that yoga studio exactly 4 times. I know this now because I've been back through the bank statements. Methodical, late-night archaeology of a relationship I was trying to understand after the fact. For times in January, and then the Tuesday and Thursday evening absences continued, but the charges from the yoga studio stopped. She was going somewhere on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She was telling me she was at yoga, and for 6 weeks I believed her because I trusted her, and because the human brain is extraordinarily good at not completing the equations it doesn't want to solve. The clearest signal, the one I should have caught, the one that still makes me sit with a particular kind of quiet shame, came in early March, 5 weeks before the proposal. We were at dinner with James and his wife, Petra, at a Thai place we all liked. James and I had been friends since college, the kind of friendship built on enough shared history that we'd stopped needing to be careful with each other. He was a contracts lawyer, sharp and practical, with a gift for reading situations that had always made him valuable in a crisis. At some point during dinner, while Vivian and Petra were in conversation, James leaned across to me and said, very quietly, "Is everything okay with you two?" I looked at him. Why? He held the look for a moment, not uncomfortable, just measuring. I don't know. She seems somewhere else tonight. I looked at Vivian. She was laughing at something Petra had said, fully present, animated. She seems fine to me, I said. James nodded and let it go. But James was not a man who asked questions without reasons, and the question stayed with me longer than I admitted at the time. 3 weeks later, I bought the ring. The secondary characters in this section function as a kind of distributed early warning system that Nathan consistently fails to decode. James's question at dinner, "Is everything okay with you two?" is perhaps the most significant moment in part 2, precisely because it comes from the person with the least to gain from asking it. James is not a gossip or an alarmist. He is a contracts lawyer who reads situations for a living. His observation of Vivian as somewhere else is a professional-grade read, not a casual impression. Nathan's dismissal of James's concern, looking at Vivian, seeing her laughing, concluding she seems fine, reveals the central cognitive trap he is in. He is evaluating her surface behavior and using it to override a concern that is actually about her interior state. James is commenting on something he senses beneath the performance. Nathan is measuring the performance and finding it adequate. The two men are looking at the same woman and seeing entirely different things, which tells us something important about the limits of observation when it is filtered through love. Rebecca, the yoga colleague, is a beautifully constructed red herring, a real person whose reality validates a false explanation. Vivian does know Rebecca. They do have genuine rapport. This is precisely what makes the yoga studio cover story so sustainable for so long. It is not a lie built from nothing, but one anchored in real relationships and plausible details. The best deceptions always are. The bank statement detail, discovered after the fact, revealing for yoga visits across 6 weeks of claimed attendance, is the kind of evidence that arrives too late to prevent the damage but too early to enable forgiveness. It answers the factual question while leaving the deeper one. Why, and for how long, and with whom, still open. I proposed in April and spent the 3 weeks between the proposal and the engagement party in a state I can only describe as the most productive anxiety of my life. The proposal had gone as planned. Vivian had said yes. We had drunk the champagne and watched the city go dark, and I had held her hand across the small table I'd carried up 6 flights of stairs that afternoon. She was warm. She was present. She was, I believed, genuinely happy. If there was a moment when I might have seen something wrong, I was not looking for it. A man who has just proposed and been accepted is not in a scrutinizing frame of mind. But the weeks that followed had a texture I didn't understand then and do now. Vivian became, if anything, busier. The park project was entering its final design phase, she said. Presentations to the city planning board, contractor coordination, the particular chaos of a public commission nearing its deadline. This was plausible and, I think, partly true. But she was also quieter in a new way. Not the functional quiet of someone processing a heavy workload, but the specific quiet of someone carrying something they haven't decided what to do with. Her phone, I noticed, was never left unattended. This was new. Previously, her phone had been an ordinary object in our shared space, left on counters and tables and couch cushions with the casual disregard of someone with nothing to protect. Now it traveled with her. Not conspicuously, she was too careful for conspicuous, but consistently. It moved when she moved. I told myself this was reasonable. We were newly engaged. She was probably fielding congratulations, coordinating with her mother about the party, managing the kind of social administration that comes with formal commitment. Private correspondence was not inherently suspicious. I told myself this on a Tuesday evening when she left for what she said was a final walkthrough of the park site with a city liaison. At 7 in the evening. On a Tuesday. I did not say anything about the time. I did not say anything about the phone she'd pocketed before leaving. I sat at my desk with a stack of student papers and graded them with methodical focus, while something below my conscious attention ran its own quiet calculation. The suspicion, actual, named suspicion, not the archived anomalies I'd been collecting for months, arrived through Cora. Vivian's sister had arrived in Nashville 4 days before the engagement party to help with preparations and, more honestly, because she and Vivian were close in the particular way of sisters who've chosen each other as adults as well as by birth. Cora was warm and disorganized and funny, the opposite of Vivian's precision, and I liked her in the uncomplicated way you like someone who makes no demands on you. She came to our apartment on Thursday afternoon while Vivian was at a client meeting. She was there to pick up a package Vivian had ordered for the party, table centerpiece elements, I think, and I made her coffee and we talked for 40 minutes about Portland and her job and a hiking trip she was planning. She was easy company. She was leaving when she stopped in the doorway and turned back. The expression on her face was one I'd never seen from her. Something held carefully, the way you hold an object you're not sure whether to put down or keep. "Nathan," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? I mean, are you sure about this?" I looked at her. "About the engagement?" "About everything," she said. And then, before I could answer, "I just want Vivian to be happy. Both of you. I want it to be right." The emphasis on right was slight, but real. I heard it. I filed it. "I'm sure," I said. She nodded, once, and left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after she'd gone. The kind of still that isn't calm, but is performing calm for an audience of one. Cora knew something. The question was whether what she knew was something I needed to know, or something she was managing on her sister's behalf, or something she was managing on mine. That evening, I did something I'm not proud of. Vivian was in the shower. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down, as it always was now. I picked it up. The screen required a passcode she had changed in December when she'd gotten the new phone. I did not know the new code. I put the phone back. I lay in the dark beside her that night and ran structural analyses of the past 8 months. The late evenings, the yoga studio, the quiet, the phone, Cora's expression in the doorway, and arrived at a conclusion I immediately refused to fully inhabit. Because the ring was already purchased. Because the party was in 4 days. Because Vivian had said yes on a rooftop with tears on her face, and I had believed her, and believing her was the load-bearing wall of my entire recent life. I told myself I needed more information before drawing conclusions. This was true and also a lie. I had enough information. I simply could not afford what the information was telling me. 2 days before the party, James called. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you not to ask me how I know it." I sat down. "There's a man named Marcus Webb," he said. "He's a developer, commercial real estate, works with the city a lot. He and Vivian have been involved, I think since before Christmas. The room did something that rooms don't actually do." "How do you know this?" I asked. "I told you not to ask me that." "James." A pause. "A client of mine knows him." It came up, obliquely. "Nathan, I'm sorry, I didn't know how to tell you. I've been trying to figure out if I was wrong." "Are you wrong?" I asked. Another pause, longer. "I don't think so." I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him. I hung up and sat for 17 minutes by the clock on the wall, not moving, while the building I had been living in silently redistributed its load across every beam I'd thought was solid. Then I got up, went to my desk, and spent 2 hours preparing my lectures for the following week. I did not cancel the party. The narrative of Part 3 can be mapped onto a clear sequence of threshold moments, each of which represents a stage in the collapse of Nathan's constructed reality, and each of which offers a point where the story might have taken a different shape. The first threshold is Cora's visit. Her question, "Are you sure about this?" is an invitation, albeit an oblique and deniable one, for Nathan to open a conversation that might have changed everything. If he had pressed her, if he had created the space for her to say what she was clearly carrying, the party might have been canceled privately, the revelation managed between the people most affected. Instead, he says, "I'm sure," and she leaves, and the secret continues its independent trajectory toward a much more public collision. The second threshold is the phone. Nathan picks it up, finds he can't access it, and puts it back. This is the moment most clearly diagnostic of his psychological state. He has both the physical opportunity to investigate and the emotional inability to complete the action. The changed passcode is simultaneously a practical barrier and a symbolic one, a door he can see but not open. His retreat is not passivity, but the active decision of a man who understands that some information, once obtained, cannot be enacted on. The third and most significant threshold is James's phone call. At this point, Nathan has confirmed intelligence, a name, a timeline. The engagement party is 2 days away. He has every structural justification to cancel, to confront, to alter the course of what is coming. Instead, he sits for 17 minutes and then prepares lecture notes. This is not denial in the shallow sense. It is the last defense of a man who has built his entire recent future around a single decision, and who cannot yet bear to demolish what he's built. The point of no return, in retrospect, is the moment he does not cancel the party. After that decision, the story can only proceed toward its public ending. The morning of the engagement party, I woke at 5:40 and lay in the gray pre-dawn light beside a woman I loved and had known for 3 years and 4 months, and who was, I had been told by someone I trusted, living a parallel life I had not been shown. I watched her sleep. This sounds more cinematic than it was. I wasn't watching her with dramatic intensity. I was simply awake while she wasn't, doing what insomniacs do, cataloging the room, the ceiling, the sounds of the building, and the face of the person beside me. She slept on her left side, always, one hand tucked under the pillow. Her breathing was even and quiet, and carried no trace of the thing that was sitting in my chest like a structural fault waiting to be tested. I had decided, sometime in the night, that I would not confront her before the party. This decision had a logic I can defend. I did not have proof, only James's account, and James's account was secondhand and obtained through a chain he refused to specify. I am an academic. I understand the difference between evidence and hearsay. I understood that what I had was enough to destroy us and not enough to be certain I was right too. But I also understood, beneath that justification, that I was afraid. That I had invested a version of my future in this woman and this relationship and this ring, and that the prospect of being wrong, of confronting her and discovering I had misread everything, that James's source had been mistaken or malicious, was almost as terrifying as the prospect of being right. So, I spent the morning gathering what I could. Marcus Webb was not difficult to find. A commercial real estate developer in Nashville with city contracts is not a private person. He had a professional website, a LinkedIn profile, a presence in local business news. I sat at my desk for 2 hours with coffee I didn't drink and built a profile from public sources. 41 years old. Founded his firm 9 years ago. Multiple public park-adjacent development projects, which explained, with cold, structural logic, how he and a landscape architect working on a city park commission might have been introduced. The intersection was professional. The continuation was apparently not. I found one photograph that mattered, a Nashville Business Journal piece from the previous October about a mixed-use development near the park Vivian was redesigning. Vivian was quoted in the article as a collaborating designer. Marcus Webb was quoted as the developer. There was no photograph of them together, but the byline of their collaboration was there in black and white, and the dates aligned precisely with when the late evenings had begun. I closed the laptop. I had a professional connection, a timeline, and James's word. I did not have a confession, a message, a photograph of the two of them. In a court, it would be called circumstantial. In my chest, it felt like a sentence already delivered. I spent the afternoon getting ready for a party I should have canceled. Vivian was luminous that evening in a way that made everything harder. She wore a dress I hadn't seen before, deep green, the color she wore when she wanted to be visible, and she moved through the preparations with a focused energy that I parsed, now, with a different kind of attention. Was this happiness? Guilt? The particular performance of someone who has made a decision and is executing against it? I could not tell. I had lost confidence in my ability to read her, which is its own form of loss. At Henley's, the room was everything her mother had promised. The peonies, the lights, the careful arrangement of people who mattered to us distributed around a long table set for a celebration. I shook hands and embraced and accepted congratulations with what I hoped was indistinguishable from genuine joy. And perhaps it was. There is a version of me that was, still, genuinely present in that room. Genuinely glad to see my parents and James and the friends I hadn't seen in months. The structure of the evening held, for a while. Structures often do, right up until they don't. I saw Marcus Webb when he entered. He came in during the cocktail hour, before we'd moved to the table, a late arrival, and I noticed him the way you notice an anomaly in a room, which is immediately, and without being able to explain why. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, which briefly confused my read of the situation. He spoke with Elaine near the entrance for several minutes. They appeared to know each other, and Elaine gestured toward our side of the room, and he looked, and I watched his eyes find Vivian. And I watched Vivian's back go straight. She didn't turn. She was in conversation with Petra, and she didn't turn. But something changed in the line of her spine, the set of her shoulders, the way a person's body responds to a presence before the conscious mind has processed it. She knew he was there. I thought. She invited him. Or her mother did, not knowing what he was. Or he came uninvited, knowing what this evening was, for reasons of his own that were not benign. None of these options were good. I spent the cocktail hour watching him with the peripheral focus of someone who has learned to observe without appearing to. He was socially fluent, moved through the room easily, spoke to several people I didn't know. The woman he'd arrived with drifted toward the bar and stayed there. He did not approach Vivian during the cocktail hour, and she did not approach him. But twice I tracked both their positions and found them calibrated, a specific distance maintained, neither too close nor too pointed in its avoidance. The professional awareness of each other's location, which is not the same thing as not knowing each other. By the time we moved to the table and the toast began, I had assembled what I had. The profile, the timeline, the body language, the line of her spine when he walked in, James's word, Cora's careful question in my doorway. It was not proof. It was load-bearing evidence pointing toward a conclusion I had been refusing to stand under for 3 days. I was standing under it now. When Marcus Webb stood up from the far end of the table at 8:15, I had already known for approximately 90 minutes that something was going to happen. I had not known its shape. I had not known it would come from him. Nathan's decision to attend the party in possession of James's information and to spend the morning researching Marcus Webb rather than confronting Vivian reveals the internal architecture of a man in acute psychological conflict between his need for certainty and his terror of what certainty will cost. He is, professionally, a researcher. He gathers evidence. He builds arguments. He verifies before concluding. Applied to his relationship, this instinct becomes a form of sophisticated avoidance. He researches instead of confronting because research maintains the illusion of agency while deferring the actual crisis. The moment he closes the laptop, having assembled a professional connection, a timeline, and a second-hand account, and begins preparing for the party is psychologically precise. He has enough information to act and chooses not to, which is itself an action, the decision to let the evening proceed, to allow the situation to resolve itself through whatever mechanism is already in motion. This is not passivity. It is the choice of a man who suspects that he has already lost the capacity to control the outcome and is defaulting to witnessing. Vivian's spine straightening when Marcus enters is one of the most important moments in the narrative because it is the body's unedited response, involuntary, immediate, beyond the reach of the careful management she has been practicing for months. The body knows what the performance conceals. Nathan reads it correctly, and the fact that he reads it correctly, that his observational capacity has not actually failed him, only been selectively applied, makes his earlier refusal to act all the more painful. Marcus arriving with a woman is the story's most effective red herring. For a moment, it introduces the possibility that Nathan has misread the entire situation, that Marcus is simply a professional acquaintance brought by Elaine, that the evening will pass without incident. This momentary doubt is the structural function of the red herring. It restores uncertainty precisely when the protagonist has achieved near certainty, and makes the revelation that follows hit harder for being briefly in doubt. Marcus stood at the end of the table and said, "I think there's something people in this room deserve to know." The sentence landed in a room where 7 conversations were in mid-breath, and those conversations stop the way conversations stop when something shifts the gravity of a space. 47 people registered the anomaly. A man standing, not the groom, not the best man, not any part of the planned sequence, and turned with the collective attention of an audience who understood, before he said another word, that whatever came next was going to matter. I looked at Vivian. She was looking at Marcus. Her face had done something I had never seen it do. Not fear. Exactly. Not guilt. Exactly. But the expression of someone watching an event they have anticipated with dread and are now living through in real time, which is different from either of those things because it contains both and also something beyond them, a kind of grim arrival. "My name is Marcus," he said. His voice was even. He wasn't drunk. I checked that immediately, registered it, filed it. This was not alcohol talking. This was a man who had decided to do this, who had come here to do this, possibly who had been invited here specifically so that someone else didn't have to. Some of you know me professionally. I apologize for interrupting, but I think Nathan deserves to hear this before he gets married. Elaine, at the opposite end of the table from where I was sitting, had gone the particular white of someone who has made a catastrophic error in judgment. She had, I understood in that moment, invited Marcus Webb. She had put him on the guest list as a professional contact, her daughter's collaborator on the park project, a useful connection, without knowing, or without fully knowing, what he was. Or she had known and invited him anyway, for reasons of her own that I still don't entirely understand. "Vivian and I," Marcus said, and paused, and in that pause, I watched my father's face and James's face and my mother's face, each registering something different, and I kept my own face still with the effort of someone holding a cracked thing together by sheer compression, have been seeing each other. Since November. The word seeing did particular work in that sentence. It was chosen, I thought, later, much later, when I had the distance to analyze his word choices, for its neutrality. It did not say involved or together or any of the words that would have specified the nature of the relationship more precisely. It left room, and I didn't know whether that room was mercy or cowardice. Vivian stood up. She did not look at me. That is the thing I have returned to most often in the 4 months since, that she stood and faced Marcus and did not turn to me. Later she would tell me that she couldn't, that she had known for 3 days that something was going to happen. He had told her he was coming, had told her he planned to say something, and she had not warned me or canceled the party or found a way to tell me herself, because she had, by then, been trying to find the right way to tell me for 2 months and had failed every time she tried. And when Marcus told her he was going to speak, she had believed, she said, that this was the universe removing the choice from her hands. She let the universe do it. She did not cancel the party. "This isn't the right place," she said to him. Her voice was controlled in the way of a person using control as a last available resource. "No," he said. "It's not. But there isn't a right place for this." "Vivian." My own voice surprised me. I hadn't planned to speak, hadn't known what I was going to say until it was already coming. "Look at me." She turned, and I saw it. Everything I had been cataloging and filing and refusing to complete was there in her face, assembled finally into a whole I could read without ambiguity. Guilt and grief, and something else underneath both of them that I still don't have the word for. Relief, maybe. The relief of someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has finally put it down, even though the putting down has destroyed the floor. "How long?" I asked. "Nathan." "How long, Vivian?" She closed her eyes. November. November. The new phone. The yoga studio. The late evenings with a city liaison at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. 5 months. We had been engaged for 3 weeks of those 5 months. And for those 3 weeks she had been, what? Trying to decide. Letting it run in parallel. Choosing, repeatedly, not to tell me. I looked at the ring on her finger. The cushion-cut diamond in the platinum setting. 6 months of careful deliberation, purchased on a Tuesday, She's a lucky woman. I'd like everyone to go home, I said. My voice was very quiet. The room, I understood, was absolutely silent. The particular silence of people who are present at something they know they will not forget. Nathan, James started. Please, I said. I need everyone to go home. What followed was the strange, prolonged, purgatorial process of a party becoming undone. People finding coats and bags and partners, speaking in the subdued register of those exiting a scene, the string lights still casting their golden light over the white peonies as if the room had not registered what had happened in it. Elaine was speaking to someone, possibly herself. Raymond sat at the table looking at his hands. Cora stood near the door with the expression of someone who has been dreading this arrival for a long time and finds that its actual presence is worse than the anticipation. Marcus left without speaking to me. I have not spoken to him since. I don't know what I would say. When the room was down to family, Vivian's parents, Cora, my parents, and James, who stayed because James would not leave without being explicitly asked, and I hadn't explicitly asked, Vivian walked toward me. I was going to tell you, she said. Before the wedding. A pause. I know that's not. Before the wedding, I repeated. I turned the phrase over. Before the wedding. As if the wedding were a deadline rather than a life we'd been building toward. As if there were a window in which the information was acceptable. I was trying to figure out what I wanted, she said. And what do you want? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. And what I saw in her face was not the answer to my question, but the fact that she did not yet have one. She had been seeing another man for 5 months. She had accepted my proposal. She had let an engagement party proceed while carrying a secret that would detonate it. And she still did not know what she wanted. That, more than anything else that happened that evening, was the thing that broke it. Not the betrayal. Not Marcus standing up. Not the 47 people watching. The not knowing. The discovery that I had been a variable in someone else's unresolved equation, waiting for a conclusion that was never coming. I took her left hand gently. I removed the ring from her finger. I put it in my jacket pocket. I'm going to go, I said. She didn't say anything. I went. Marcus's speech is the story's emotional and dramatic apex, and its most psychologically complex moment, because Marcus, as a character, is not straightforwardly heroic or villainous. He breaks the secret, yes, but his motivation is ambiguous. Is this concern for Nathan? A claim on Vivian? The action of someone who has decided that if the relationship cannot be public, it will be ended? His word choice, seeing each other, deliberately neutral, suggests someone aware of the weight of language, which in turn suggests premeditation. He has thought about this. He has chosen to do this. Why is a question the story leaves partly open? Nathan's response, the request for everyone to go home, delivered quietly, without drama, is his most revealing moment. A less controlled person would have erupted. Someone more self-protective might have collapsed. Nathan does neither. He manages the room with the compressed authority of someone using every remaining unit of self-regulation to prevent the full structural failure from being witnessed by 47 people. The emotional cost of this management will be paid elsewhere and later. Vivian's revelation that she did not know what she wanted is the story's true climax. Not the public exposure, but this private admission. It reframes the entire preceding narrative. Nathan has been living as a certainty inside someone else's ambivalence. Vivian has not been choosing Marcus over Nathan. She has been unable to choose at all, and that inability has been, in its own way, the cruelest form of disregard. The engaged party was not a lie she told him. It was a lie she told herself, that she could sustain the suspension long enough to resolve it quietly, privately, without exactly this. The removal of the ring, gently, without words beyond, I'm going to go, is Nathan's most precisely right action. It does not perform grief. It does not demand explanation or apology. It closes the circuit of the proposal. What was given is taken back. What was built is acknowledged as unable to stand. The engineering logic of it, formal, structural, complete, is the most Nathan thing he does. For months is not very long. I know this. I know that people who have lived through worse things than a canceled engagement have required years rather than months, and I am not claiming a recovery that hasn't fully happened. What I'm claiming is a beginning, the start of understanding what occurred and what it means and what, if anything, it changes about how I intend to live. The ring is in a box in my desk drawer. I don't know what to do with it yet. Return it to the jeweler feels like a transaction I'm not ready for. Keeping it feels like a different kind of failure. So, it sits in the box and I don't open the drawer unless I'm looking for something else. And sometimes I open the drawer for something else and see the box and close the drawer again. This will resolve itself in time. Most practical things do. Vivian and I spoke twice in the weeks following the party. Long, quiet, effortful conversations of the kind that require both people to set down their defenses and say the actual things, which is harder than it sounds, and which neither of us was particularly good at in the moment. She told me, in that first conversation, that her feelings for Marcus had begun before she'd fully understood they were feelings, the way these things sometimes do, as a professional regard that shifted gradually into something warmer and then into something she couldn't explain away. She had not, she said, intended for it to happen. I believe her. I believe that she did not plan the deception, only sustained it, which is its own kind of choice but a different one. She also told me that she had loved me. Past tense, which I received as honestly as I could, which was not without pain. She had loved me, and she had still been capable of this, which is the part that the rational mind keeps trying to resolve and which, I have come to understand, does not resolve. Love is not an inoculation. Love is not a structure that, once built to code, cannot be undermined. This is perhaps the single most important thing the entire experience has taught me, and it is the hardest thing to hold. I asked her why she hadn't told me. She said she'd been afraid of losing me before she knew what she wanted. I asked her if she understood that the waiting, the silence, the ring and the party and the 5 months of parallel lives, that this was itself a loss, a different and in some ways worse loss than the one she'd been trying to avoid. She said yes. She said she understood that now. I think she did, and I think she had not before. She and Marcus are together, as far as I know. I have not asked and she has not volunteered, which is an arrangement that works for both of us. James, in the days after the party, was exactly what he'd always been. Present, practical, and wise enough to know that I didn't need analysis as much as I needed company. We spent a Saturday morning in May running a trail in Percy Warner Park in silence, and then eating breakfast at a diner on Charlotte Avenue. And he didn't say much, and I didn't say much, and it was the most useful thing anyone did for me in the immediate aftermath. Cora called me twice. The first call was an apology, halting, genuine, the specific guilt of someone who had seen the oncoming collision and been unable to prevent it without betraying her sister. I told her she didn't owe me an apology, and then, because she was Cora and she would see through the social grace of it, I told her, "You tried." In the doorway, "I didn't give you room to say more." She said, "I should have said more anyway." I said, "Maybe." We left it there. The second call was 3 weeks later, just to check in, which I hadn't expected and which moved me more than I can easily explain. The engagement party night I have returned to many times in my mind, not with the obsessive replay of someone trapped in it, but with the more deliberate revisitation of someone trying to understand a structure that failed, tracing the load paths, identifying where the stress concentrated, naming the elements that were inadequate from the beginning. What I keep arriving at is this. The structure was not unsound in the place I thought it was. The foundation, what Vivian and I had built together over 3 years, was real. The problem was not that I had built something false. It was that I had built it with incomplete information, and the element I was missing had been there, present, exerting its own forces, from before I laid the first stone. November. Before Christmas. Before I bought the ring. Before the rooftop. Before the champagne, I'd driven 40 minutes to Source. She had already been, in some form, somewhere else. And I had been planning, in my careful, methodical, architectural historian way, the most important evening of my life. I have spent some time being angry about this. The anger is legitimate, and I am not trying to outrun it. But I have also, gradually, come to a more complicated place, one that is not forgiveness exactly, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that human beings are capable of simultaneous truths, of loving one person and being drawn to another, of meaning a yes and carrying a secret, of wanting a future and being unable to build one without first demolishing what's in the way. These are not admirable capacities, but they are real ones. I have stopped trying to make Vivian simply a betrayer, because the simple version requires me to excise the 3 years that preceded the betrayal, and those years were real, and they were mine too. What I am left with is this: the ring in the box, the drawer I don't open unless necessary, the beginning of a different understanding of what it means to know someone. Not the version where love means total transparency, where trust means the guaranteed absence of secrets. A harder version. One where knowing someone is an ongoing act rather than an achieved state, where vigilance and care are not opposed to love but are part of it, where the questions James asked at dinner, "Is everything okay?" are questions worth sitting with rather than dismissing with a glance at the performance. I am teaching a seminar this fall on the architecture of institutional failure, the structural, political, and cultural factors that produce collapse in buildings that should have held. My students will spend a semester studying the gaps between design and execution, between the blueprint and the built thing, between what engineers trusted and what failed. I find, unexpectedly, that I am looking forward to it. The best failures teach us what the successes conceal. And sometimes the thing that looked like the most solid wall turns out to be the place where everything was concentrated. All the weight, all the tension, all the unresolved force of a structure that was quietly asking for maintenance while presenting a perfect face. Buildings are honest, in the end. They tell you where the cracks are, if you look. People are more complicated. People can hide the cracks for a long time. But the cracks are always there, in the wood grain of a small silence, in the shifted position of a phone, in a sister's careful question in a doorway, in the way a woman's spine changes when someone enters the room. I just have to learn to look for them. The deepest psychological current running through this story is not Vivian's deception of Nathan, but the self-deception practiced by both of them, simultaneously, in different registers, for different reasons, and with different consequences. Vivian's self-deception is the more visible. She builds and sustains the narrative that she can manage two parallel emotional realities until she has enough clarity to make a choice, without acknowledging that the management itself is the choice. Every day she spends with Marcus without telling Nathan is a decision, not a deferral, not a pause, but an active choice to continue concealing at Nathan's expense. The internal story she tells herself, that she is figuring out what she wants, that she will tell him before the wedding, is a structure built to make inaction feel like thoughtfulness. It collapses under the weight of its own contradiction the moment Marcus stands up. Nathan's self-deception is subtler and in some ways more psychologically revealing. He is a man who prides himself on attention and structural analysis, yet he applies these faculties selectively, unconsciously filtering out the signals that would require him to act on what he's seeing. The archived anomalies, the phone, the yoga studio, Cora's question, James's dinner observation, are not missed. They are noticed and filed in a category labeled "not yet conclusive," which functions as a cognitive holding space for things he doesn't want to confront. His research methodology, which is genuine and admirable in academic contexts, becomes in this context a sophisticated mechanism for sustaining uncertainty rather than resolving it. What the story ultimately argues is that self-deception in relationships is almost never about not seeing. It is about the unbearable cost of seeing completely and the elaborate internal architectures we construct to delay that cost for one more day. Both Nathan and Vivian are intelligent, perceptive people who managed not to fully see what was in front of them because full sight would have required them to act, and action would have required them to sacrifice something they were not yet ready to lose. The tragedy is not stupidity or malice. It is the ordinary human capacity for motivated blindness, and the way it tends to resolve not through quiet private reckoning, but through the public, structural, irreversible collapse of the thing it was trying to protect. Nathan's final turn toward his seminar on institutional failure is not irony, but integration. The beginning of making meaning from damage, of finding in the professional discipline he's always trusted a framework for the personal experience he's still processing. It is, like all good architecture, an act of hope disguised as analysis. Research on broken engagements suggests that approximately 20% of all engagements in the United States do not result in marriage, and that in the majority of cases, the issues that led to the broken engagement were present, in some form, before the proposal. The question the data cannot answer is how many of those issues were visible to both partners and simply never spoken aloud.